Arthur MacAllister surveyed the symphony of demolition and creation, his rugged face a canvas of hardened experience. Cranes groaned, hammers clanged, and dust motes danced in the late afternoon sun. Then, a delicate, almost ethereal melody, a soft whistle, pierced through the industrial din. Mac froze. The noise of the construction site faded into a distant hum as the simple tune resonated deep within him instantly, terrifyingly familiar. His breath hitched. It was impossible. He hadn't heard that specific sequence of notes in 20 years, not since. He scanned the chaos, his eyes narrowed, searching. Finally, his gaze locked onto a young laborer, barely out of his teens, whistling with a casual, unconscious ease. A ghost from his past, a melody born of a love long buried, had inexplicably materialized on this dusty site. The young man, Leo Finch, continued to work, oblivious to the foreman's intense, almost predatory stare. He hefted a beam, then wiped sweat from his brow, the tune still a soft, breathy whisper on his lips. Mac's mind raced, battling between the cold logic of coincidence and a desperate, impossible hope. Millions of melodies existed. It had to be a trick of his mind, a cruel echo from a wounded heart. Yet, the distinct, almost asymmetrical rhythm of the lullaby, a cadence known only to one person, made his dismissal ring hollow. He fought the overwhelming urge to stride over, to demand answers from this stranger who unknowingly held a fragment of his shattered world. Later that evening, the sterile quiet of Mac's sparsely furnished apartment was a stark contrast to the day's din, but the lullaby filled it nonetheless. He sat alone, the phantom melody replaying in his mind's ear, each note a fresh cut on an old wound. Vivid flashbacks of Elara, his vibrant, artistic wife, flooded his consciousness. She had hummed it, her hand resting on her swollen belly, her eyes shining with the promise of new life. "It's our little star song, Mac," she'd whispered, her voice soft as velvet. "A secret melody, just for our baby, a star to guide him home, no matter where he goes." It was a tune she'd composed herself, a unique arrangement that carried the very essence of her gentle soul. A lullaby only she knew, meant only for their son. Mac paced the small living room, the implications of the lullaby overwhelming him. Could it be? After all these years, after the crushing grief of Elara's death in childbirth, after the agonizing decision to place their infant son into the labyrinthine foster care system, could this be a sign? A cruel twist of fate, or a miracle? Fear warred with a desperate burgeoning hope. To investigate meant opening wounds that had barely scabbed over, risking a false hope that could shatter him completely. But to ignore it, to ignore the echo of Elara's love, the whisper of his lost son's existence, felt like a betrayal. He stopped, his shoulders straightening. He had to know. For Elara, for the child he had never truly known, he would find out who Leo Finch was, no matter the cost. The sun beat down on the San Francisco construction site the next morning, but the heat did little to thaw Arthur MacAllister's grim resolve. The symphony of jackhammers and reversing trucks had returned, a familiar drone that usually filled his world. But today, a new, insidious hum persisted beneath it all, the echo of a forgotten lullaby. His eyes, sharp and watchful, swept over the crew, ostensibly checking progress on the rebar cage but truly searching. They landed on Leo Finch, the young laborer, who was hauling concrete blocks with an almost rhythmic grace. Mac pretended to consult blueprints, his brow furrowed in concentration, but his gaze kept returning to Leo. He needed to know more, but how to ask without revealing the raw, impossible hope clawing at his gut. "Mac, a word." The voice was sharp, tailored, cutting through the din like a laser. Richard Rickthorne, the project manager, strode towards him, a vision of corporate precision amidst the dust and grime. Rick was all crisp shirts and spreadsheets, a man who saw the world in profit margins and deadlines. He saw people as units of labor. "Problems with the new hires, Mac?" Rick asked, his voice low but laced with impatience. He didn't wait for an answer. That new kid, Finch. Good worker, but he's been whistling a lot. Distracting. And you, Mac, you seem distracted yourself. We're on a tight schedule here, no room for sentimentality. Rick's gaze flicked towards Leo, then back to Mac. A clear warning. The implication hung heavy in the air. His foreman was getting soft, and it was costing them. Lunch break offered no respite. Mac sat alone in the cab of his battered Ford F-150, the roar of the city outside muted, replaced by the thrum of his own racing heart. From a worn leather satchel he pulled out a small, almost sacred bundle of papers. Elara's death certificate. Its official script, cold and stark, declared her gone 20 years ago. Then, the adoption papers for their son, a document filled with bureaucratic language that stripped away all humanity. Infant male, placed into foster care immediately following mother's passing. He remembered the sterile white hospital room, the nurses, hushed whispers, the crushing weight of a grief so profound it had nearly swallowed him whole. Elara, gone. His vibrant, artistic Elara, taken by a complication no one had foreseen. And then, the baby. His son. They had told him he wasn't fit. A young, grieving widower, barely scraping by. The system, cold and efficient, had stepped in. He had fought. God, he had fought. But his grief had been a weakness they exploited. The memory of a tiny cry, swallowed by the silence of the empty nursery, still haunted his nightmares. He had lost everything, all at once. The papers felt like lead in his trembling hands. Could Leo, this young man with the ghost of Elara's melody, truly be the child he'd been forced to give up? The thought was terrifying, exhilarating, and impossibly fragile. He couldn't face this alone. That evening, Mac found himself perched on a familiar stool at the Rusty Nail, a bar that smelled perpetually of stale beer and lost dreams. Frank, the owner and Mac's oldest friend, slid a glass of amber liquid across the polished wood. "Rough day, Mac?" Frank's voice was warm, familiar. Mac took a long swallow, the burn a welcome distraction from the ache in his chest. "Rough doesn't even begin to cover it, Frank." He hesitated, then plunged in, the words coming out in a gravelly rush. He spoke of the lullaby, of Elara, of the son he'd lost. Frank listened, his expression shifting from curiosity to a profound, empathetic sadness. "A lullaby, Mac? After all these years?" Frank shook his head slowly. It's a long shot, old friend. But if anyone deserves a miracle, it's you." He paused, wiping down the counter. "You know, there are social workers. People who specialize in these things. Finding lost family, even after all this time. It's a labyrinth, but they know the paths. A flicker of something, a fragile, desperate hope, ignited in Mac's chest. The next morning, the air in Mac's cramped site office was thick with tension. Rick Thorne stood over Mac's desk, a hand resting on a stack of invoices, his expression glacial. "I'm seeing a pattern here, Mac," Rick began, his voice devoid of warmth. "Your numbers are down, productivity's slipping, and I've seen you, watching that new kid, Finch. Getting too chummy with the labor, aren't we?" Mac's jaw tightened. He knew this game. Rick was a corporate shark, and he smelled weakness. "I'm managing my crew, Rick. The site's safe. The work's getting done." Rick scoffed. "At what cost?" "I don't pay you to play father figure, Mac. We're building a skyscraper, not a daycare. That kid, Finch? He's a replaceable cog. If your distraction continues to affect performance, I'll find someone who can keep their eye on the ball. And I'll start by letting go of anyone who's causing the problem." Rick's eyes, cold and calculating, darted towards the window, where Leo was visible, diligently stacking timber. The message was clear. This wasn't just about Mac's job anymore. It was about Leo's livelihood. The air in the local social services office was a stark contrast to the dust and din of the construction site. It was quiet, filled with the hushed rustle of papers and the soft murmurs of voices. Arthur MacAllister, his usual gruff exterior softened by vulnerability, sat opposite Maria Sanchez, a woman whose kind eyes belied the stacks of files that surrounded her. He laid out his story, haltingly at first, then with a growing surge of desperate conviction. The lullaby. His lost wife, Elara. His son, given to foster care. Maria listened patiently, her expression a mix of compassion and professional caution. "Mr. MacAllister," she began, her voice gentle but firm. "Finding an adult who was adopted through the foster care system, especially after so many years, is incredibly difficult. Records are sealed. Anonymity is paramount." She explained the legal hurdles, the ethical considerations, the sheer labyrinthine bureaucracy. "But," she added, seeing the despair begin to cloud his eyes, "it's not impossible. We can start by looking for non-identifying information. Anything that might match your son's birth, details with records of children placed at that time." Mac nodded, a weary but determined glint in his eyes. It was a long road, but for the first time in 20 years, he felt a glimmer of hope. The city lights of San Francisco bled through the window of Leo Finch's small, cluttered apartment. Dust motes danced in the lone beam from a street lamp, illuminating a worn armchair piled with books and a makeshift easel. Leo, hunched over a sketchpad, charcoal smudged on his hands and cheek, was lost in the quiet flow of his art. Unconsciously, a soft, haunting melody escaped his lips, a gentle whistle that filled the small space. It was a tune that had been a silent companion through the years, a whisper of comfort in a life defined by shifting foster homes and the stark absence of a known past. He often wondered about his birth parents, a dull ache beneath the surface of his independent spirit, a quiet longing for roots he'd never known. Each stroke of charcoal was a question, each hum a memory without a source. As the hour grew late, Leo set aside his sketchbook, the lullaby still echoing in his mind as he prepared for bed. It was a melody his foster mother, Martha, used to hum, her voice a comforting balm against the anxieties of childhood. "It's your song, Leo boy," she'd always said, though she never knew its origin, just that it had been passed down to her with him. His fingers instinctively reached for a small, intricately carved wooden bird, smoothed by years of handling. Martha had given it to him, a tangible piece of the adopted past he did know, a physical anchor in a world of unknowns. The bird, a symbol of freedom and yet also of nesting, felt cool and solid in his palm, a silent reminder of the love that had raised him and the mystery that still lingered. Back on the construction site the next late morning, the cacophony of drills and hammers provided a harsh backdrop to another tense encounter. Rick Thorne, sharp-suited and sharper-tongued, cornered Mac by a stack of steel beams. "MacAllister!" Rick's voice was a low growl, barely cutting through the din. "Your numbers are slipping. Project timelines are tight. I've seen you, staring off into space, or worse, staring at that new kid, Finch. This isn't a charity, Mac. You need to focus." Mac's jaw tightened. "I'm focused, Rick." "Are you?" Rick sneered, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. "Because if performance doesn't improve, I'll have to start restructuring the labor force. And new hires are always the first to go. Understand?" He gestured vaguely towards Leo, who was diligently hauling materials nearby, oblivious. Mac's anger simmered, a protective instinct warring with his duty. Later that week, in Maria Sanchez's organized, yet warm social services office, a glimmer of light pierced through the bureaucratic fog. Maria, her face a mixture of professional calm and genuine excitement, slid a folder across her desk to Mac. "Arthur," she began, her voice hushed with significance, "I've found something. It's not much, and records are still heavily sealed, but I found a pattern. A particular foster home, Elara's Haven, ironically named, I suppose, often took in infants from St. Jude's Hospital around the time your son was born. And," she paused, her eyes meeting his, "there's a consistent, though vague, entry in their intake logs about a child with a distinctive, non-standard lullaby hummed by the mother." Mac felt his breath catch, a sudden, dizzying surge of hope and fear. It was the first solid lead in 20 years. Late that night, in the quiet solitude of his apartment, Mac sat with the faded photograph of Elara in his hands. Her smile, radiant and full of life, mocked the barren landscape of his years. Maria's words echoed in his mind. Elara's Haven, distinctive lullaby, the weight of a 20-year-old secret, of a child he'd only held for a moment, pressed down on him. Could it be? Could Leo, the young laborer with the haunting whistle, truly be his son? The thought was terrifying. What if he was wrong? What if Leo rejected him, saw him as a ghost from a past he never wanted to know? But beneath the fear, a desperate, undeniable yearning pulsed, a father's heart, long dormant, now beating with a fragile, impossible hope. He had to know. He couldn't turn away now. The air in the social services archive room was thick with the dust of forgotten lives, a silent testament to countless stories lost to time and bureaucracy. Mac, his broad shoulders hunched over a table laden with aged files, felt the weight of it all. Beside him, Maria Sanchez, her movements precise and practiced, navigated the labyrinth of microfiches and binders. Her fingers, stained faintly with ink, pointed to a ledger entry. "This foster home," she murmured, her voice cutting through the quiet. "It appears to have been a hub for long-term placements in the early 90s. See? A pattern. Infants, usually under 6 months, often from challenging circumstances." Mac's breath hitched as he leaned closer, his gaze fixed on the dates, so agonizingly close to the year his son was born. A flicker of hope, dangerous and fragile, ignited within him. He saw a name, a small detail, a faded note about a child who loved to draw in the margins. It was a minuscule thread, but to Mac, it felt like a lifeline. Back in Maria's office, the sterile fluorescent light felt harsh after the sepia tones of the archive. Maria watched Mac, her kind eyes reading the raw hope etched on his weathered face. "Mac," she began gently, "this journey, it's a delicate one. For you, yes, but for Leo, too. Imagine discovering your entire past is different from what you believed." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "We need to be cautious, to protect him, and to protect the integrity of this process. My advice is to try for non-identifying information first. Dates, circumstances surrounding placement, perhaps even a general description of his birth mother's interests. Anything that can confirm the link without forcing a direct confrontation too soon." Mac nodded, his gaze distant, processing her words. He understood. His own heart ached with a lifetime of longing, but he knew Leo's world, too, could be shattered or remade by this revelation. That night, the silence of Mac's apartment was broken only by the insistent hum of the refrigerator. He sat in the dim light, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips, lost in a memory so vivid it felt like yesterday. Elara, her belly round and full, a radiant glow softening her features, sat by the window. Her fingers, nimble and graceful, danced over the keys of a small, dusty keyboard, coaxing out a melody. "It's a secret tune, Mac," she'd whispered, her eyes shining with maternal love. "Just for our little one. I want it to be a sound that always brings him comfort, a star to guide him home, no matter where he is." She hummed the unique, lilting sequence, a complex but tender progression that only she, with her artist's ear, could have conceived. "No one else will know this one, my love. It's ours, and his." The memory was a double-edged sword, beautiful yet steeped in the profound sorrow of what was lost. Across town, in his own small apartment, Leo Finch wrestled with a different kind of quiet. He was sorting through a box of his foster mother's old belongings, a task he'd put off for years. Amidst faded photographs and forgotten trinkets, his fingers brushed against a small, yellowed note tucked inside a worn copy of a children's storybook. The handwriting was his foster mother's, shaky with age. It simply read, "Leo, my dear boy, the lullaby, it was always yours, never forget it." A frown creased Leo's brow. Always yours? What did that mean? He'd always assumed it was just a song his foster mother had learned somewhere, a comforting tune from his childhood. But the note implied a deeper, more personal origin, a secret resonance he'd never considered. He hummed a few bars of the melody, now more consciously, a growing sense of mystery stirring within him. The next morning, the sharp crack of Rick Thorne's voice sliced through the construction site's usual din. He stood in Mac's office trailer, his expensive suit pristine amidst the blueprints and coffee stains, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. "Mac, we need to talk. Your focus has been compromised. Project deadlines are tight, and your attention is clearly elsewhere." Rick's gaze flicked pointedly towards the site where Leo was working. "And that new hire? He's a distraction. I've heard whispers, Mac. This isn't a charity. You're jeopardizing your career, and, frankly, the project, by getting emotionally invested in a low-level employee. We run a business here, not a halfway house." His tone was laced with disdain, a cold, calculated warning. Mac's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. Rick's words were a direct assault, not just on his professionalism, but on the very hope that had begun to mend his hardened heart. The midday sun beat down on the construction site, baking the dust and metal. Leo Finch leaned against a stack of freshly cut lumber, wiping sweat from his brow with a grimy forearm. He hummed softly to himself, an unconscious, lilting tune that had been a companion through countless solitary tasks. It was the lullaby his foster mother used to sing, a melody so ingrained it felt like part of his own heartbeat. An older, retired worker, Frank, who sometimes visited the site for a chat and a free coffee, paused nearby, his eyes, rheumy with age, widening almost imperceptibly. He tilted his head, a flicker of distant recognition in his gaze. "That tune," Frank murmured, his voice gravelly. "Haven't heard that in decades. Used to be a popular one, back when I volunteered at the old St. Mary's Home for Children. All the kids there knew it." Leo looked up, surprised, the humming fading. "Really?" he asked, a new, unfamiliar curiosity stirring within him. "My foster mom sang it to me." Frank just nodded, a knowing, wistful look on his face, before shuffling off. The sterile quiet of Mac's apartment was a stark contrast to the site's cacophony. He sat at his kitchen table, a single lamp casting a harsh glow on Elara's old belongings. Faded photographs, a worn scarf, and finally, a slim, leather-bound notebook. It was her music journal, filled with elegant, looping script and meticulously penned notes. His fingers, calloused from years of gripping steel and rock, trembled as he opened it to a familiar page. There it was, the lullaby. Every note, every rest, every delicate phrase Elara had painstakingly composed. But it wasn't just the melody. Tucked within the seemingly simple arrangement, almost camouflaged, was a unique, recurring chord progression, a subtle, unexpected harmony that changed the entire emotional texture of the piece. It was her fingerprint, a musical signature only she would have woven into her most personal creation. A sharp, bittersweet pang twisted in Mac's chest. This wasn't just a tune. This was Elara, a piece of her soul etched into music, a secret language only he could truly decipher. A single, unbidden tear escaped his eye, tracing a path through the dust on his weathered cheek before falling onto the faded paper, blurring a cluster of notes that now promised everything. Maria Sanchez listened with a professional, yet empathetic, patience as Mac laid out Elara's music notebook on her desk. His voice, usually gruff, was tinged with an earnestness that bordered on desperation. "See here," he pointed, his finger trembling slightly on the page. "This chord progression. It's unusual, a specific inversion she loved. No one else would have thought to put it there, not in a simple lullaby." Maria, initially maintaining her trained skepticism, leaned closer, her brow furrowed in concentration. She followed the notes, her musical eye recognizing the unique signature Mac described. Her gaze lifted to his, a flicker of dawning realization replacing her doubt. "It's compelling, Arthur," she conceded, her voice softer than usual. "Very compelling." The professional wall around her began to crack. She saw not just a desperate father, but a man holding irrefutable evidence of a love that had transcended time. Days bled into a week. Maria's office, usually a sanctuary of calm, became a battlefield of bureaucracy. She had initiated the process to petition the court to unseal the adoption records, a labyrinthine journey fraught with legal complexities. Each phone call brought another layer of resistance, another form to fill, another justification to write. "The system is designed for anonymity, Arthur," she'd explained to Mac over the phone, her voice strained with frustration. "To protect the privacy of all parties. It's not easy to undo decades of sealed documents, even with the evidence you have." She hung up, running a hand through her hair, exasperated. Stacks of legal tomes and case files cluttered her desk, a testament to the sheer weight of the task. The clock on her wall ticked relentlessly, each second a painful reminder of Mac's mounting anxiety, a tangible obstacle in the path of a father's desperate hope. Amidst the controlled chaos of the construction site, a quiet, almost imperceptible shift began. Mac, his eyes heavy with the weight of expectation and bureaucratic delays, watched Leo. The young man moved with a practiced grace, his brow furrowed in concentration as he secured a beam. Mac approached, a rare, encouraging word forming on his lips. "Good work, Finch," he rumbled, his voice softer than usual. Leo looked up, a faint smile touching his lips, surprised by the foreman's rare compliment. He nodded, then, without thinking, began to hum the familiar lullaby under his breath, a soft, almost inaudible melody amidst the clang of steel. Mac's gaze intensified, his internal turmoil a storm Leo remained blissfully unaware of. It was a shared moment, a fragile, unspoken connection, the lullaby, a silent, invisible thread weaving between them in the dusty air. The flimsy door to Mac's office trailer was not so much opened as it was violently thrown aside, rattling on its hinges. Richard Thorne, or Rick as he preferred to be called, filled the doorway, his face a furious crimson, his tailored suit jacket straining across his broad shoulders. He stalked in, radiating an icy disdain that could chill the dust-laden air. "MacAllister, what in the hell do you think you're doing?" Rick's voice was a low snarl, thick with barely contained rage. "This isn't some damn personal crusade. This is a multi-million-dollar project, and you're sabotaging it with your distraction." He slammed a thick, cream-colored envelope onto Mac's metal desk, the sound echoing in the small space. "I'm offering you a way out. A severance package. Enough to make your little hobby disappear." And as for Finch, Rick's lip curled in disgust. "He'll be gone by the end of the day. A job offer at a site 3 states over. Take it, and this nonsense ends. Or you both go down." Rick's eyes, usually so calculating, now blazed with a cold, unforgiving fire. He was not asking. He was dictating. The door slammed shut, leaving Mac in the ringing silence of his trailer. He stared at the envelope on his desk, its crisp white mocking the grimy reality of his world. A severance package. A bribe. An attempt to buy off his hope, to silence the echo of Elara's song. Rick's cruelty, so blatant and dismissive, had the opposite of its intended effect. The anger that had simmered within Mac for days, years even, now ignited into a righteous fire. He reached for the envelope, his fingers trembling, but not with fear. With a fierce, unwavering resolve, he tore the check in half, then into quarters, the sound a ragged declaration of defiance. He would not be bought. He would not be silenced. He looked at the faded photograph of Elara on his desk, her smiling eyes seeming to encourage him. "No," he whispered, his voice hoarse but firm. "Not this time. I won't lose him again." He would fight. For Elara. For Leo. For the impossible thread of hope that had brought them this far. Leo Finch found himself in Rick Thorne's pristine, air-conditioned office trailer, a stark contrast to the dust and sweat of the construction site. Rick sat behind a polished desk, a thin smile playing on his lips, a predatory glint in his eyes. "Leo," Rick began, his voice smooth, almost paternal, "I've been impressed with your work. You're a sharp kid. Which is why I've pulled some strings. There's a new project opening up in Arizona. Better pay, faster progression. A real opportunity for someone like you." He slid a brochure across the table. Leo's gaze flickered to it, then back to Rick. He sensed the unspoken coercion, the subtle pressure to disappear. This was not an offer. It was a dismissal cloaked in false generosity. He thought of the site, of the rough camaraderie, of the strange, compelling pull he felt here, and, faintly, in the back of his mind, he heard the lullaby. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," Leo said, his voice polite but firm. "But I like it here. I think I'll stay." In the quiet hum of her office, Maria Sanchez held the phone, her brow furrowed with concern. "Mac, I'm trying," she said, her voice laced with frustration. "The court order is stalled. Bureaucracy. Legal loopholes. It's a maze. They're citing privacy concerns, the age of the records. It could take weeks, months even." Mac's voice on the other end was tight, strained. He recounted Rick's latest threats. The severance package, the attempt to push Leo out. Maria felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "He's trying to isolate you, Mac, to cut off your support. And now Leo's job is on the line too." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of unanswered questions and dwindling hope. Mac felt the walls closing in, the relentless pressure from Rick, the agonizing slowness of the legal system. Was it all for nothing? Was he destined to lose his son again, just as he had found him? Max sat in his apartment, the darkness outside mirroring the despair in his heart. The phone lay heavy in his hand, Maria's words echoing. Months. He felt a crushing exhaustion, a weariness that went bone deep. He was about to give up, about to let the ghosts of the past finally claim their victory. Then, the phone buzzed. Maria. His heart, heavy moments before, now hammered against his ribs. "Mac, I did it!" Her voice was breathless, excited. "I pulled a favor. A massive one. It's not a full unsealing, but I found a partial record. From the foster home. It mentions a child placed there around the right time. And get this." Maria's voice trembled with awe. "It mentions he hummed a unique, self-composed melody. A lullaby, Mac. They wrote it down. It's the one, isn't it?" Mac dropped into his chair, his hand shaking, the phone illuminating his face. A single tear, hot and unstoppable, traced a path through the grime on his cheek. He didn't need to answer. He knew. The aroma of stale coffee and sawdust clung to Mac's office trailer, a familiar comfort that now felt alien. Arthur MacAllister sat behind his battered desk, the steel-reinforced door a flimsy barrier against the roaring construction site outside. In his trembling hands he held the delicate sheet music of Elara's lullaby, its notes a roadmap to a past he'd only dared to dream of. He took a deep breath, the air thick with unspoken history, and looked at the young man standing awkwardly before him. Leo Finch, unaware of the tectonic shift about to occur in his world, shifted his weight. "Leo," Mac's voice was rough, a gravelly whisper. "There's something I need to ask you, something important." Leo's brow furrowed, a flicker of concern replacing his usual easygoing expression. "Sure, Mac, what is it?" "That tune you hum sometimes," Mac began, his gaze unwavering. "The one you whistle when you're working. Could you hum it for me now?" Leo hesitated, a strange request but complied, a soft, clear melody drifting through the small trailer. It was unmistakable, the unique cadence, the gentle rise and fall. As Leo hummed, Max slowly, deliberately, laid the sheet music on the desk. Leo's humming faltered, his eyes widening as he recognized the notes, the melody he knew by heart, now starkly real on paper. Time stopped. The cacophony of the construction site outside faded to a distant hum. Leo stared at the sheet music, then at Mac, confusion warring, with a dawning, terrifying recognition. Mac's own eyes were glistening, a lifetime of unshed tears threatening to break free. That's it," Leo whispered, his voice barely audible. How do you have this?" Mac leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly on the desk, his voice raw with emotion. "That lullaby, Leo, it was written by my wife, Elara, your mother. She composed it for our son before he was born, before she died in childbirth." The words hung in the air, heavy with grief and impossible truth. "We lost her, and then they took you. The social services said I couldn't care for you. You went into foster care, a baby, with nothing but that tune in my heart, a tune only she knew, a tune meant to be a star to guide you home." He reached for a faded, creased photograph on the corner of his desk, a young, vibrant Elara, her smile radiant. "She never got to sing it to you, but you kept it. You remembered it somehow." Leo stood frozen, the photograph of Elara, his mother, in his hand. Her eyes, so full of life, mirrored the artistic spark he saw in his own reflection. Mac watched him, a tidal wave of joy and profound regret washing over him. The resemblance was undeniable now, a ghost of Elara in Leo's jawline, the thoughtful tilt of his head. It was his son. After 2 decades, his Lily had returned. "I'm so sorry, son," Mac choked out, his voice thick with emotion. He reached a tentative hand across the desk, a gesture of a father's longing. "For all the lost years. For not finding you sooner. For the pain you must have carried, not knowing. I never stopped looking, never stopped hoping." Leo flinched slightly, a subconscious recoil from the overwhelming truth. from the sudden, impossible weight of a father's touch after a lifetime of absence. His world had just imploded and reformed in a matter of minutes. The raw, guttural pain in Mac's voice, the tears carving paths down his weathered cheeks, were too real to ignore. Hours later, in the quiet solitude of his small, cluttered apartment, Leo sat amidst his belongings, the music sheet still clutched in his hand. His worn wooden bird carving, a gift from his foster mother, lay beside it. His world felt irrevocably changed, flipped upside down and shaken until every piece of his identity was loose. A father. A mother. A lullaby, not just a comforting tune, but a secret message, a desperate plea from a ghost. Is this real? His mind screamed. Can it be true? The foreman, the gruff, unapproachable Mac, his father. The thought was staggering, terrifying. He'd always longed for roots, for a past. But this was a tsunami of truth, too much to process. He remembered his foster mother, her kind face, humming that same melody, passing on a legacy she didn't understand. He felt a profound disorientation, a sense of falling through time. His life, his entire existence, had been a prelude to this moment, a melody played without its accompanying lyrics. The next morning, the construction site roared to life, but Mac was conspicuously absent. Leo, his mind still a swirling vortex of disbelief and dawning hope, found himself called into Rick Thorne's temporary office. Rick, sharp-suited and radiating disdain, gestured dismissively at Mac's empty chair. Mac won't be in today, Finch, Rick stated, his voice clipped. Frankly, I'm not sure he'll be back at all. His distractions have become untenable, and frankly, your performance has suffered by association. He leaned back, a thin smile playing on his lips. I'm afraid we'll have to let you go, but don't worry. I've arranged a generous severance and a recommendation for another site, far from here. Leo felt the familiar pressure, the attempt to dismiss him. But something was different. A quiet strength, a subtle defiance had settled in his bones. The faint echo of the lullaby hummed in his mind, a defiant counter-melody to Rick's cold pronouncements. No thank you, Mr. Thorne, Leo said, his voice quiet but firm. I'll be staying. I have work to do here. Rick Thorne surveyed the bustling construction site from the window of his office trailer, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. The project was back on track, MacAllister was finally being reined in, and that troublesome young laborer Leo would soon be a distant memory. He'd won. The world, as Rick saw it, always bowed to logic and efficiency. A sharp rap on his trailer door pulled him from his reverie. He spun around, expecting a foreman with a progress report, but instead, a woman stood on his threshold. Maria Sanchez, the social worker, held a thick manila envelope, her expression calm but resolute. Mr. Thorne, she began, her voice cutting through the hum of the distant machinery. I have a court order here. It compels this company to cooperate fully with a family reunification investigation. Effective immediately. Rick's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. The paper Maria held seemed to vibrate with a power that far outstripped his own. The air in the cramped office trailer thickened, charged with an unspoken tension. Just as Rick sputtered, searching for a rebuttal, the door opened wider. Arthur, MacAllister, stepped inside, his weathered face etched with a newfound determination, a quiet strength that Rick had never seen. Beside him, Leo Finch stood, his young eyes wide, darting between the adults. Maria stepped forward, presenting the court order to a dumbfounded Rick. This order, she stated, her voice clear and authoritative, is based on compelling evidence, including musical notation and a partial record of birth placement. Mac, his gaze unyielding, met Rick's. You wanted to know why I was distracted, Rick? Why I wouldn't let you bully this young man? Mac's voice, usually a gravelly murmur, now boomed with righteous fury. He held up Elara's music sheet, the unique chord progression visible. Because this isn't just some cheap piece of silver, Rick. This is a mother's song. And this young man, he gestured to Leo, his voice thick with emotion, is my son. My son. Leo. Rick's face drained of color. his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The silence was deafening, a testament to the irrefutable truth that had just crashed down upon him. Rick Thorne, a man whose entire identity was built on control and calculation, stood utterly defeated. The power he wielded, the threats he'd issued, all of it dissolved in the face of this raw, undeniable human truth. Mac, his chest heaving with a mix of triumph and protective rage, turned to him. "Get out, Rick," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Get off my sight. You're done here." Maria Sanchez stepped forward, her hand resting gently on Mac's arm, a silent gesture of support. She spoke with professional calm. "Mr. Thorne, any further interference with Mr. Finch's employment or Mr. MacAllister's personal matters will be considered a violation of this court order." Rick, looking years older, stumbled backward, his eyes glazed with shock and humiliation. He was escorted off the site by two bewildered security guards, his once imposing figure now appearing small and insignificant against the vastness of the construction project. Maria turned to Leo, a warm smile gracing her lips. "Your job here is secure, Leo, more than secure, and your rights are fully protected." Mac placed a hand on Leo's shoulder, a silent promise of a future no longer defined by loss. After the storm of Rick's departure, a heavy quiet settled over the construction site. Mac led Leo to a quieter corner, away from the lingering whispers of the crew. Leo, still reeling, looked at the ground, the music sheet clutched in his hand. I don't know what to say," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "It's too much. All of it. I'm scared, Mac. How can I just suddenly have a father? After all this time, after believing I had no one." The vulnerability in his voice was stark, a testament to the decades of unanswered questions. Mac's heart ached, with a profound, bittersweet regret for the years lost, but also with an overwhelming surge of paternal love. He longed to bridge the chasm of their shared, yet separate, pasts. Mac gently placed a hand on Leo's shoulder, his touch surprisingly soft. "I know it's a lot, son," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "More than any man should have to carry. But this song, your mother, Elara, she created it for you. She said it was a star to guide you home. It wasn't just a tune, Leo. It was a promise. Her promise. A mother's eternal love. A melody that spanned decades, just waiting to bring us back together." He looked into Leo's eyes, seeing not just his own reflection, but a flicker of Elara's spirit. Leo slowly met his gaze, a faint, tentative smile touching his lips as the haunting, beautiful notes of the lullaby seemed to echo softly in the quiet air between them. The harsh, utilitarian light of Mac's apartment felt softer now, almost welcoming, as evening deepened. On the worn coffee table, usually home to blueprints and takeout menus, sat a small, dust-free collection of memories. Mac, his gruff exterior softened by the day's profound revelations, gently guided Leo through them. There were old photo albums, their pages brittle with time, chronicling a life Leo had only just discovered. A younger Mac, smiling a genuine, unguarded smile, stood beside a radiant woman with eyes that sparkled with an inner light. Elara, Leo's birth mother. Mac's calloused finger traced her face in one faded snapshot. "She loved to draw," he murmured, his voice a low, reverent rumble. "Filled notebooks with sketches, just like you." He gestured to a stack of well-loved books, their spines cracked. Poetry, art history, and a collection of musical scores. Leo picked up a slender volume, Elara's name elegantly inscribed on the title page, in a looping hand that was strikingly familiar. He recognized his own nascent artistic talent, not as a random gift, but as a direct inheritance. A living thread connecting him to the woman he had never known, but whose melody had guided him home. In that quiet room, surrounded by the echoes of a life once lived, Leo felt a sense of belonging he had always craved. A profound, bone-deep resonance. He was not alone. He was a part of something beautiful and enduring. The silence hung heavy, but it was a comfortable silence now, filled with unspoken understanding. Leo, his fingers still tracing the delicate curve of Elara's handwritten name, looked up from the book. His eyes, so like his mother's, met Mac's. A lifetime of questions, of yearning, of quiet searching, culminated in a single tremulous word. Dad. The sound, barely a whisper, vibrated through Mac's very soul, a melody sweeter than any Elara had ever composed. His eyes, usually guarded, welled with tears, reflecting a joy he thought had been lost to him forever. He managed a shaky smile, a slight nod. Son! The word felt new, precious, a promise of a future stretching out before them. They spoke then, not of grand plans, but of simple things, sharing stories over coffee, working side by side on the site, building not just structures but a life, together. In the small apartment, a quiet, profound moment unfolded, years of loss and longing finally converging. Mac reached out, his weathered hands, once stiff and reluctant, now open and inviting. Leo met him halfway. Their embrace was hesitant at first, then firm, a powerful, unspoken symphony of reconnection. It was an embrace that transcended the decades, washing away the bitter taste of grief, the gnawing ache of the unknown. Mac's arms, strong from years of labor, wrapped around his son, a protective anchor. Leo leaned into it, feeling the solid warmth, the steady beat of a heart that had searched for him for so long. It was a release, a catharsis, a quiet, tender forging of a family that had been broken, but was now, impossibly, made whole again. Weeks later, the construction site hummed with a different energy. The dust still rose, the machinery still roared, but for Mac and Leo, the air was clearer, brighter. They worked side by side, their movements synchronized, a comfortable banter flowing between them, punctuated by shared glances and easy smiles. Mac, no longer haunted, led with a quiet confidence that inspired his crew. Leo, grounded by a newfound sense of belonging, thrived under his father's guidance. One afternoon, Maria Sanchez, her face alight with genuine pleasure, visited the site. She watched them for a moment, a proud smile gracing her lips, witnessing the powerful, undeniable truth. Love, when given a chance, could build anything. In their shared home that evening, the golden light of dusk filled the room. Mac watched Leo, who sat sketching in his notebook, a slight, unconscious hum escaping his lips. It was the lullaby, the haunting, beautiful melody that had started it all. No longer a ghost from a painful past, it was a living song, a testament to enduring love, to a mother's legacy and a father's relentless hope. It was the music of a family, finally, beautifully, in harmony.